Richard Mercer straightened his Brioni tie as he boarded the first-class cabin of Flight 1087 from New York to Los Angeles. At 42, the tech executive had grown accustomed to the finer things in life, the result of selling his cybersecurity startup for 9 figures 3 years prior. The flight attendant guided him to seat 2A, where he settled in, immediately pulling out his laptop to review quarterly projections. As Richard immersed himself in spreadsheets, he vaguely registered someone taking the seat beside him. Without looking up, he sensed the person was fidgeting, encroaching slightly into his space. Irritated, Richard glanced sideways. The man wore a wrinkled hoodie, basketball shorts, and well-worn sneakers, looking entirely out of place in first class. Richard immediately catalogued him as someone who'd used miles or a companion ticket to upgrade. "Excuse me," Richard said curtly, gesturing to the armrest between them. "Would you mind?" The man in the hoodie shifted, offering a good-natured smile. "Sorry about that, just getting comfortable." There was something familiar about him, but Richard couldn't place it. The flight attendant approached, offering pre-departure champagne. "None for me, thanks," the hoodie-clad passenger said. "Just water." Richard accepted his champagne with a practiced smile, then pointedly placed his noise-cancelling headphones on, creating a barrier between himself and his seatmate. 20 minutes into the flight, Richard noticed several passengers discreetly taking photos in their direction. Annoyed by the distraction, he removed his headphones. "Excuse me," Richard said to the flight attendant who was passing by. "Is there another seat available in first class? I'm trying to work." "I'm afraid we're full today, sir," she replied, her eyes darting nervously between Richard and his seatmate. The man in the hoodie looked up from his book. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Richard replied coldly. "Just trying to get some work done without distractions." The man nodded, seeming unbothered. "I get it, long flight." A young woman approached from the main cabin, clutching a napkin. She hesitated, then addressed Richard's seatmate. "Mr. Sandler, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my mom is your biggest fan. Would you mind?" Richard froze, finally registering who was sitting next to him. Adam Sandler. The Adam Sandler took the napkin with a warm smile, chatting easily with the young woman as he signed it. After she left, Richard felt his face burning. He'd just treated one of Hollywood's most successful actors like an inconvenience. Worse, he'd done so loudly enough that nearby passengers had noticed, their disapproving glances making it clear how they viewed his behavior. "I'm sorry," Richard stammered. "I didn't realize—" "No big deal," Sandler replied easily, returning to his book. "Happens all the time." But the damage was done. As the flight continued, Richard sat rigid with embarrassment, acutely aware that his arrogance had been on full display, not just to any celebrity, but to one known for his approachability and kindness to fans. The spreadsheets on his screen blurred as he realized how thoroughly he'd just revealed his character. For the remainder of the flight, Richard buried himself in his laptop, too mortified to engage. Sandler seemed unfazed, alternating between reading his book and jotting notes in a small pad. Several more fans approached, and each time Sandler responded with genuine warmth. When the plane touched down at LAX, Richard gathered his belongings quickly, eager to escape. As passengers filed into the terminal, he noticed a small crowd forming around Sandler, who graciously posed for selfies and signed autographs. That evening in his Beverly Hills hotel suite, Richard couldn't shake his discomfort. He flipped through channels on the TV, stopping when Sandler's face appeared in a Netflix documentary about his career. The interviewer asked about dealing with fame. "Look, I'm just a regular guy who got lucky," Sandler said on screen. "I wear comfortable clothes. I look like anybody's neighbor. Sometimes people don't recognize me until I start talking, and that's fine. It keeps me grounded." Richard winced, the words hitting too close to home. He pulled out his phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media. To his horror, a post was gaining traction. Watch some tech bro in first class treat Adam Sandler like garbage today because he wasn't wearing designer clothes. Sandler was super nice about it. Money really doesn't buy class. The post already had thousands of likes and shares. Though no one had identified Richard by name, it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. His stomach churned as he scrolled through the comments, each one condemning the tech bro, condemning him. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner. "Is this you?" Followed by a link to the viral post. Richard stared at the ceiling, realizing how quickly his reputation could unravel. In the tech world, connections were everything, and Los Angeles was a small town for people in his position. If this story continued to spread, it would follow him into every meeting, every networking event. What bothered him most wasn't the potential damage to his business relationships, but the stark mirror the incident had held up to his character. When had he become someone who judged others based on their clothing, who assumed that first class was his exclusive domain? Richard barely slept that night, tossing between Egyptian cotton sheets that suddenly felt too extravagant. By morning, the post had been picked up by several entertainment news sites. His humiliation was now public fodder, and he had only himself to blame. 3 days later, Richard sat in a conference room at Paramount Studios, struggling to focus on the cybersecurity presentation he was delivering. Executives nodded along, but he could sense an undercurrent of whispers. Had they seen the posts? Did they know he was the tech bro from the plane? After the meeting, a studio executive approached him. "Good presentation, Richard." Say, "Weren't you on a flight from New York last week?" Richard's heart sank. "I was." "Thought so," the executive said with a knowing look. "The industry's smaller than you'd think." That evening, Richard cancelled his dinner reservations and ordered room service instead. As he picked at his Wagyu steak, he opened his laptop and searched for interviews with Adam Sandler. Video after video showed the same genuine person, someone who, despite enormous success, remained humble and kind. In one particularly revealing interview, Sandler discussed growing up with limited means. "I never forget where I came from," he said. "All this success, it's great, but it doesn't make me better than anybody else." Richard thought about his own path. Unlike Sandler, he'd grown up privileged: private schools, Ivy League education, seed money from family to start his company. Yet somehow, he'd developed the belief that his success was entirely self-made, that it entitled him to look down on others. His phone rang, his sister calling from Boston. "Please tell me that wasn't you in that Adam Sandler story going around," she said immediately. Richard sighed. "It was." "Richard, what were you thinking? That's not how Mom and Dad raised us." She was right. His parents, despite their wealth, had always emphasized treating everyone with respect. Somewhere along his rise in Silicon Valley, he'd forgotten those lessons. "I know," he admitted. "I've been a complete jerk." "So what are you going to do about it?" she challenged. The question lingered after they hung up. What could he do? The incident had revealed something ugly about himself that he couldn't unsee. His embarrassment was evolving into something deeper, genuine shame about the person he had become. That night, Richard wrote a long email to his executive team, declining his year-end bonus and requesting that the money be donated to arts, education in public schools instead. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something important, a realignment of his values. For the first time in years, he fell asleep not thinking about market shares or profit margins, but about the kind of person he wanted to be. A week later, Richard was back in New York, having cut his Los Angeles trip short. The viral story had largely faded from public attention, but not from his conscience. He'd spent the past few days reorganizing his foundation's giving priorities, focusing more on grassroots organizations than the high-profile galas that had previously dominated his philanthropy. His assistant knocked on his office door. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent." Richard frowned. "Who is it?" "He says his name is Tim Herlihy. He's a screenwriter." The name sounded vaguely familiar. Richard searched his memory, then froze. Herlihy was Adam Sandler's longtime writing partner and friend. Had he come to confront Richard about the plane incident? "Send him in," Richard said, bracing himself. Herlihy entered, casually dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt. "Thanks for seeing me, Mr. Mercer. I'll get right to the point. I'm producing a charity event next month benefiting underprivileged kids in the arts. Adam mentioned meeting you, and when we researched your foundation's work, we thought you might be interested in participating." Richard blinked in surprise. "Adam mentioned me?" Herlihy smiled knowingly. "He said you seemed like someone who might be looking to make a difference in a more personal way." The implication was clear. Sandler had recognized Richard's moment of awakening on the plane, and instead of publicly shaming him, was offering him a chance at redemption. "What kind of participation did you have in mind?" Richard asked cautiously. "We need someone to lead a workshop on the business side of creative industries. Help these kids understand how to protect and monetize their talents. Given your background, you'd be perfect." It was the last thing Richard had expected, not just forgiveness, but an invitation to do something meaningful. The old Richard would have written a check and sent an associate to represent him. But the person he was trying to become knew this required more. "I'd need to clear my schedule, but yes, I'm interested," Richard said. "On one condition, I'd like to establish a permanent scholarship fund for the program as well." Herlihy grinned. "Adam thought you might say something like that. He's got a good read on people." After Herlihy left, Richard sat quietly in his office. The humiliation that had consumed him was transforming into something unexpected: gratitude. Sometimes it took being at your worst to find your way back to your best. That evening, Richard called his sister. "Remember when we were kids and Mom would make us volunteer at that shelter on Thanksgiving instead of going skiing with our friends?" "Of course. We complained the whole time," she laughed. "I think I finally understand what she was trying to teach us," Richard said softly. 1 month later, Richard stood nervously in the wings of a community theater in Brooklyn, watching 20 teenagers present business plans for their creative projects. He'd spent every Saturday for the past 4 weeks working with them, sharing his knowledge of contracts, intellectual property, and financial management. But they had taught him far more than he'd taught them. Adam Sandler appeared beside him, dressed in his characteristic casual attire. "They're doing great," he said, nodding toward the stage. "They're incredible," Richard agreed. "Thanks for—" He paused, searching for words. "For giving me this opportunity." Sandler shrugged. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Besides, these kids needed someone with your expertise." The final presentation concluded, and the audience erupted in applause. Herlihy invited Richard and Sandler on stage to announce the scholarship recipients. As Richard approached the microphone, he saw faces filled with hope looking back at him, kids who had never had the advantages he'd taken for granted. "When I was your age, I thought success was about what you could acquire," Richard said. "The right schools, the right connections, the right zip code. It's taken me far too long to realize that true success is measured by what you give, not what you have." He announced not 5 scholarships as planned, but 20, 1 for each participant. The theater erupted in cheers, parents and students, embracing in tearful celebration. Later, as the event wound down, Richard found himself sharing pizza with Sandler and several of the students in the theater's green room. "So, you're really going to help me copyright my music?" asked Desiree, a talented 16-year-old composer. "Absolutely," Richard promised. "My legal team is yours," Sandler observed quietly, a subtle smile on his face. As the evening ended, Richard and Sandler walked together toward the parking lot. "You know," Sandler said, "there's this script I've been working on about a guy who has everything but doesn't realize what he's missing until he loses it all." "Sounds intriguing," Richard replied. "The thing is," Sandler continued, "I'm thinking of changing the ending. Instead of the guy just learning his lesson, maybe he uses his resources to create opportunities for others." Richard smiled, understanding the parallel. "I'd watch that movie." "Yeah," Sandler nodded. "Me too." As they reached their cars, Richard extended his hand. "Thank you, not just for the second chance, but for the wake-up call." Sandler clasped his hand warmly. "The best characters are the ones who evolve, right?" Driving home that night, Richard passed gleaming skyscrapers that housed his investments, luxury stores where he'd spent small fortunes, exclusive clubs where he'd networked with other wealthy individuals. They no longer seemed like achievements. His phone buzzed with a text from one of the students. "Mr. Mercer, my mum said to thank you for changing my life." Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine fulfillment. His humiliation on that flight had been the beginning of a journey, not the end. As he stopped at a red light, he glanced at the passenger seat where a worn copy of the student's business plans lay. Tomorrow, he would call his executive team. There were changes to be made, priorities to shift. The light turned green, and Richard drove forward, leaving behind the man he had been, embracing the man he was becoming.